Coming up on today's episode, what are we all feeling in this pandemic? How do we manage the long term and the short term? More software stuff? And also, what are my thoughts on online classes? Up next on Themindhere. Hey, what is up, everyone? It's Theguyhere, and welcome back to another episode of Themindhere, the bi-weekly podcast where I talk about new knowledge I've learned, projects I'm working on, and current events. Topics may be random, but I hope that with each episode you can come away with a fresh perspective on the universe. Welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. If you like my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing. All right, a quick note or a few before we begin. The first thing is that I've got a case of bad allergies this week, so if you hear me sniff a little, sound a little nasally, or a little deeper than usual, it's just because of that. Nothing more serious. And the second note is that from now on, I'm going to try to make the podcast videos a little more continuous in that I will not do any more, fade outs between the different sections. It's just going to be sort of maybe a quick title flashing through. And also, I'll be looking down at the prompts, the scripts that I have, just to give a little more of a sort of genuine feel, as I do sometimes need to look down. It also just gives me a good guide, but I'm not reading from a script. So this just gives a little insight into what's going to be changing a little bit with these episodes. But without further ado, let's head right back into the episode. All right, so the first topic we're going to talk about is, of course, the pandemic experience. And this topic has been touched up quite a bit with the past few episodes, but it sort of covers a whole bunch of different episodes. Maybe like half a dozen-ish of the past episodes have been sort of related to this. And this is because I'm talking about that pandemic lull, the feeling of languishing, the feeling of not wanting to do anything. This, as I found out, has been quite a universal experience by a lot of different people. But granted, for context, I live in the United States, and all the people that I have communicated with that have shared the same feeling live in the United States. But I have a feeling this is a much broader experience, at least for countries that are locked down in a pandemic state. So this feeling, it extends quite a ways back. And if you look back at my previous episodes, you can probably tell by the maybe a lack of like passion, the shorter episodes, or just various other hints you can probably look at, the lack of motivation that everyone has been feeling. And as my good friend puts it, it feels like apathy, a lack of passion towards things that you normally would have passion for, or maybe just overall everything just feels sort of dull a little bit. It can feel like everything's just sort of stagnant, mundane, a lot of these descriptors, but overall it's that general feeling of not wanting to do anything. And some people also put it might be because everything seems like it goes for the long term, right? Because at the short term, everything's temporary. Everything's sort of just moving along. We're sort of not in a state where we know what's going to happen in the near future, but we all, at least for the long term, we all know where we're sort of heading. But in the near future, things are sort of just floating in a limbo because of the pandemic, because things are not normal, and so we might not accept it as reality, and also the remote factor of things just don't make it feel real. It might be just because everything just doesn't feel as real. The absurdity of the pandemic, the fact that you're locked into one place or a restricted number of places, and just because the surrealness of everything, possibly just because there's not a lot of tangible progress you can feel, and that just sort of spirals down into that lack of motivation, feeds into lack of progress, back and forth. So it's a quite universal feeling. And to some extent, it comforts me to feel that it's not just me, which is, it sounds bad, but it gives me, I guess, a peace of mind that it's not just myself, because otherwise, I don't know, it'd feel quite lonely to be just you are the only one feeling it, right? But on the other hand, I guess it sort of makes sense, because for a lot of people in the world, are under similar conditions, so it would make sense that these similar conditions breed similar responses. At least for people that maybe haven't suffered a traumatic loss in the pandemic. And if you did, I am truly sorry. This might not apply to you, or might be something that's just a lot more difficult than what other people have been feeling. But for people that have not suffered a significant loss and are not currently in a particular dicey situation, I guess, this is probably a general feeling that a lot of people have been feeling. And as of right now, I'm still working through what possible ways are ways to move forward. One thing that's already sort of happening with the environment is that as the vaccination rates increase in these countries, things are slowly returning to normal, things are slowly opening up, and that change in pace, in lifestyle, in things returning to the normal might slowly kick people back into a state that's not as dormant, so that the environment changing itself might already be taking place. So maybe there might not be a need, but also there could be still a need to recover from the vegetative state that we have all sort of laying ourselves into as the pandemic has progressed. So as of right now, it's just a note that it seems like a universal experience. If this is not the experience that you had, feel free to share your experience about it, because I don't know, it's something interesting that I feel. I like noticing these macro patterns, and this is one that I found quite interesting. I thought I'd share with you guys. All right, so the next topic I'll touch up on this episode is going to be a comparison between long-term and short-term. And this is sort of related to the previous topic about the universal pandemic experience, because it's another notice that I've seen. But this also comes with some advice, or at least for myself, possibly to you guys. But it's the notice of that throughout the lull, the pandemic lull, throughout this process, I've sort of been trying to, or made an excuse for myself that it was a lack of motivation that made me not do other things, that made my progress stagnant. And to some extent, that could be true, because if you have that surge of motivation or passion, it's a lot easier to get things done. When you first start out a project or something, for example, or if you're first engaging in a relationship, it's always super passionate and you're really willing to do things. So when you're motivated, it's super easy to do things. And that's a good way to get things started in the short term. But I noticed that for the long term, it's not quite sustainable, because it's impossible to think that you'd have at least that sort of same level of motivation and drive throughout the entire process. As you get into the nitty-gritty work of whatever you're doing, right, whether it be the daily ups and downs of relationships, or just the overall, the minor details you have to work through a project or something like that, you realize that there's a lot of tediousness to life. To a lot of things that go on in life, throughout the processes that you have to go through. And because of that, it might start not feeling like, it might start feeling a little dull in the middle, which it sort of reflects that pandemic lull. It could be just because it's a long process we've been going through. But anyways, I digress from that point. There has to be another thing to keep you going throughout the long term in order to have that sustainable progress, right? And I found that of all things, I think discipline is something that will carry us through the long term. It's something that we can build, and it's something that can keep us going through the long term, even when we're feeling a lack of motivation, even when things are getting sort of tough. If we have that level of discipline can help us get through those troughs. And when the peaks arrive, whenever we feel a surge of motivation or whenever a surge of passion comes by, we realign ourselves and find that we truly do want to get back to this or something like that. We will not regret losing or getting off track during the time that we didn't feel the motivation, right? So discipline sort of is like the glue that holds things together in the long term and helps us carry through the entire process. Because often I think the beginning and the ends of processes might be more elaborate or spectacular, but the middle part is both the mundane and yet the most important part in a lot of different processes. Whether you're making things or you're continuing things or you're ending things, that doesn't sound right, but we're talking about processes here. So processes that do these things, it's often the middle parts that are mundane but most important. So with that, I think discipline is something that we can probably all sort of build up a little bit. And it's a lot, of course, the process is a lot tougher than it sounds, but this is something that I found is quite useful. And I think that motivation and passion has its place, but we shouldn't make it an excuse for why we aren't getting things done. If it's truly not something that is something that I guess you would not regret if it's something that you would not regret cutting out in the long term, then that's fine. But if it's just because you don't feel like doing it and lack of passion, then I think that's a bad excuse to sort of disengage in something. I think that the initial motivation and the passion is a good sort of direction for where to go, but that the ability to keep things going and to, carry out something to completion is for the most part the work of discipline and the ability to get things done. Of course, we all have sort of a limited amount of discipline, a limited amount of resources to divert to projects and other things we do. So it's also important, to be selective with what we engage in so that we do have enough resources to complete it. As things extend, they get more expensive, right? So it's important there too as well. But overall, the general lesson I think that I've learned is that the motivation and passion of things shouldn't be an excuse for not doing things in the long term or for continuing on things. Discipline is something that we need to sort of build back, at least for me, build back up, and remember that the surge of passions and the motivations that we get are good directions for us, telling us where the right things are. All right, the software portion I'm talking about is something called continuous integration, continuous integration. And this is a topic that I found through a YouTube channel. I was browsing through YouTube and I found this through whatever search recommendations that come up through the algorithm, which in this case did a good job because the YouTube channel, and I'll link it to wherever it will be on the YouTube video, to the channel called Continuous Delivery. They talk a lot about the concepts of continuous delivery, which as of right now I can't really explain too much, but it's a sort of software concept for getting software projects done and how we manage software projects. But so what's the whole context of this? So this is because, besides the fact that I stumbled upon this, it was relevant because of the projects that I'm currently working on, one of them being a server-side plugin for Minecraft. So it's a modification to a server or a Minecraft server, right? And so this is something that I have to code in Java, and the project that I'm doing, I'm working on it by myself, but I'm using Git as version control. But I did branches to signify different features, or to just signify the different versions of the plugin that I'm releasing, which sounds kind of odd. Why would you, working by yourself on your own repository, have different branches? That doesn't make too much sense. And for the most part, it doesn't really. But I did it because I wanted to do it for practice. And it's both good practice and it's for my practice. Good practice as in it's an industry standard to, do branches for different things, to separate things out. But also good practice because, Rewind. Also, it's good practice for me because I wanted to learn about that branching, version control, merging, all those tools. And what better way to do it than to actually, experience it. So some things that I do in whatever I do might seem redundant from a production standpoint, but from a learning standpoint, it's quite useful, even though it might seem like additional work. It's for me to get experience in things. But anyway, so with that, recently I've decided to get away with that after watching videos from Continuous Delivery about continuous integration. And just briefly from what I've seen from the videos and what I've gotten from what continuous integration is, I think that it's about it's about sort of like getting to the software code as fast as possible without getting caught up on I don't know, like when you're working with different people. I guess this is where it's more useful, but it's where when you're working with multiple people where conflicts, you want to minimize conflicts and get software product out to production as fast as possible. And with continuous integration, rather than having branches that you work on separately and then trying to merge those branches onto the main branch, the main code that you're going to use, instead of those long segments of time when you're not, when you're sort of like not even communicating with other people, right? Because if you're on your own branch of code, what you're doing is you have like a copy of whatever you had at the base, the main branch, but then you start making modifications that no one else knows. And then after a while, you decide to commit and try to merge this branch. But it could run into conflicts because other people might not have known that, and your merged code might suddenly break other people's code. So continuous integration, essentially, from what I've seen, the practice is to commit a lot so that everyone sort of knows what other people are doing, and work with code in a way so that you can sort of like turn off features when you don't need, but overall just have a good visibility of what everyone else is doing, right? So I guess what's happening here is like for like a one person job, right? This doesn't really make too much sense, but I'm sort of trying to practice it in a way where I commit more often to myself. Also try to not use branches at all, but to just commit to main. And one thing I realized that I can do releases on GitHub where I say like, okay, at this version of the code, I'm going to call this a release, where I attach some sort of files to it and say, okay, this is a significant point where there's another production version available, for example. So I didn't know about that until sort of recently, so I'm going to use that now. Now I now have that at my disposal to use. But overall, it's just a lesson that I guess it's good to have that visibility of what other people are doing within the projects. Otherwise, you could run into some conflicts with trying to get things to work together with integrating. Integration always comes at that cost, where things might not work when you try to integrate. So if you integrate as often as possible, then whatever loss of work that happens is pretty minimal. Anyways, this is just sharing some new ideas from the projects I'm working on and the journey that I'm taking. So you might hear more about this depending on how far I delve into this. I do plan on looking more into this as I close out the plugin project sometime, hopefully very soon, and start working on a new project that will also involve software. But hopefully I can start off with some of these continuous integration, agile, whatever, new ideologies, methodologies in mind, and test out new processes. But anyways, that's the software portion of what I have to talk about. And last but not least, we have a new question from one of my subscribers. And this question is from Alfred, so I'm gonna pull this up real quick from the photos. All right, so Alfred asks, it's sort of a multi-part question, but the first parts are sort of similar, so I'll go with one go. He's asking, he's pretty sure that I've been in semester, so I've been in college for now 1 year. So have my thoughts changed about online classes? And also generally online and offline classes have their own plus and minuses, but what would I consider to be better once the pandemic is over? So good questions there. It's about the rethinking of online classes, right? Because I'm pretty sure we've all had our own concepts of what it would be like before the pandemic, but now that we've been through online classes during the pandemic, what do I feel about it? And the first thing I want to do is make a distinction between in pandemic, so pandemic online classes, and probably normal online classes, because the difference here is that although they're both online classes, right? The normal online classes would have been by choice. People take them by choice, so they're more receptive to the online media, right? So people taking it would have already, people who are teaching it would be probably more familiar with the online and online process, so it would be likely more streamlined. People who are taking it probably want to and are therefore more receptive to that online format, or know that they work well with this online format. And also the fact that you're not in a pandemic, which means that you can still go out and meet people. You can still do social things. It's just that, you're taking online classes. But with pandemic online, everyone is sort of forced into online classes, which means that you have people that are teaching that frankly aren't competent with the technologies needed to do online classes, or maybe they're not familiar with online formats. So quality suffers. And you also have people who don't want to do an online format, and because they don't want it, they don't take information as well, and therefore experience is going to be bad for them. Not to mention that the social life is very limited, because even when you have normal online classes, you can talk with different people, you can meet up and whatever, you can do your classes in a coffee shop or et cetera, right? Normal activities, but online classes. In this case, everything is sort of restricted. And because of that, just everything feels a little kind of stuffy, and it's just not a great feeling overall with all of that combined. So during the pandemic, I don't think it was executed well. And of course, during the pandemic, we also realized some areas where we can definitely improve with the online curriculum. I know a lot of people come away from this, or probably will come away with this, thinking, okay, online classes will not cut it. We need in-person classes, right? Further solidify that. I argue that it's simply that we haven't gotten a good curriculum to set out for online formats. We don't have a good, people aren't versed well enough in the online formats, and that they both have their own places, right? So certain topics or certain classes might lend better to in-person communication or to in-person classes. Yeah, I totally understand that. But you can also have maybe an online backup or recorded lectures, etc., that would help smooth out the experience for these in-person classes. And some classes might actually be better online. I don't have any right off the top of my head, but certainly some formats or some topics you might be able to learn better. And of course, this all depends heavily on the people that are teaching. If you have a good teacher, then, online or in person, it doesn't really matter. If you're a good teacher, then people will learn a lot and learn better. If you're a terrible teacher, people will not learn from you. It doesn't matter what format you're using. So and to some extent, it doesn't matter that much. Overall, I still think online has its places. Some classes I probably wouldn't want to take online. Online, of course, has the benefit that you can sort of schedule it on your own, depending on if it's asynchronous or not, but it's a lot more flexible. You don't have that travel time that you have to go to. But then there's also the concern of, separation of class and or work is another thing, and your home life, for example. It might be hard for people to manage. Those of us who have a hard time managing our times, that sort of regimented schedule that we have to physically be at sort of helps people lock in class time and get to do class time. But if you're online, then people might be tempted to do other things. So it's kind of hard there on that aspect. So that's something that would also need to be considered. But overall, my view of online classes is that it'll probably become even more necessary and important as we progress technologically, just because of the low cost of attending these classes, right? All you need is your device, which for most people is already there in the modern world. So you don't need to travel and do things expensively. It's a lot easier to share lectures than to attend these physical places, right? So for certain topics and for, catching up on various things, workshops, etc., I think the online format is only going to increase, and we best get familiar with it and to teach our educators how to use these online formats, because it's just so useful. It's not something that's going to disappear or people are going to drop off. It's only going to increase in the future. But for certain things, I think that the in-person format is still better. And of course, with like college, for example, that campus experience, there's that social aspect that's pretty important. Even if you're doing classes online, I think still being in a location where people can gather and sort of have that bonding is, I think, important. If anything, this pandemic has taught us the importance of physical bonding and being physically close to people, whereas probably before this we didn't even realize the need for that, right? So a lot of lessons there, and those are my thoughts on online classes. The second part of this question is that he's curious if any of my classmates know about this series. So, well, if you, I think quite a few people, classmates from high school, maybe some college, are listening to this. Although I totally didn't expect anyone to, but if you are, maybe do a roll call down in the bottom of this YouTube video. Just kidding. If I know for the most part that some people do watch regularly, and those of you who do, I appreciate you all so much for the support that you all give me. But overall, it's just something that I can, I don't know, say that it's a way for me to, a medium of expression for me to express ideas that I've had, to sort of share it with people. Also to leave a little mark on that internet saying that I've been here. This is the legacy that I sort of leave behind, to also spark some interesting communication and conversations with people, right? This is stuff to open our minds with, things that will expand our mental capacity or thoughts that we have, ability to open up to new ideas, right? Rather than the echo chambers that we sort of gotten ourselves into, especially with the pandemic. So to answer your question, I believe quite a few people do, more than I have been aware of, as I found out. But yeah, I'm just grateful overall that anyone watches these, so appreciate you all so much. And with that, I think this is going to be the wrap for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of Themindhere. If you found this episode or this podcast to be inspiring, insightful, or intriguing in any way, and you think that someone else in your life might find this interesting or benefit from this series or this podcast, then please feel free to share this with them. And let me know what they think about it. It helps build this community, and also it means a lot to me as a small content creator, but also someone that is reaching out to the world and building things out. So thank you all so much for watching. Stay humble, and I'll see you all in the next episode.